You want to talk about a band that just does not get the respect they deserve, at least by the masses, and I believe flies very much under the radar of some of the greats, and I could say they might even belong in that category if you really dig deep enough, but that's exactly what we're going to do today, and I'm talking about the band Extreme. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back, music lovers, especially my rock music lovers. So the year was 1985. There was a band called The Dream. Now, The Dream had lead vocalist Gary Cherone, and on the drums they had a man named Paul Gary. Those two were looking to start a new band together, and they just needed a guitarist and a bassist. So they ended up finding a man named Nuno Bettencourt, who at that time played in a band called Sinful, to come in and be their guitarist. And then as they rolled into 1986, they brought in a guy named Pat Badger to play bass. Now, Pat Badger at that time played in a band called In the Pink. You can use your imagination on what In the Pink was meant to mean or where they got the name from. I know I'm using my imagination, but it doesn't matter. Those four rounded out the band that they eventually settled on the name Extreme. Now, Extreme was meant to be a homophone on the former band that Cherone and, Gary were in, called The Dream. So, Extreme, X-Dream. There you go. That's how they came up with the name Extreme. So these guys formed that band in Malden, Massachusetts, which is a little outskirt north of Boston. Now, when they got going, it was Gary Cherone and guitarist Nuno Bettencourt that started writing most of the songs together, and those would be the songs they would start performing at live shows in the New England area. Now, there was an award given to them, Hard Rock and Heavy Metal Act, the best hard rock and heavy metal act in the Boston area at the Boston Music Awards in 1986 and 1987. Now, that 1987 award helped them get signed to A&M Records, which eventually sold to a company called Polygram Records, but that's not really a big part of the story. But didn't matter. That helped them get signed and be able to put out their very first album. It was a self-titled album, which was released in March of 1989. So obviously their self-titled album that was released in 1989 is not one that they're most known for, and they didn't get as lucky as some bands did and hit a home run on their first try, where, there's tons of examples out there. The first album gets released by a band and they just literally go straight to the moon and it reaches a huge amount of success. That wasn't the case for Extreme. But the very first single off the album, Kid Ego, was, if you go back and listen to it, not a bad song, because if you really know Extreme, Gary Cherone's vocals are what make those songs great, and Nuno Bettencourt's guitar playing. But if you listen to what some of the other guys said later down the line, they said that song, when they listen to it, at least especially Cherone, he said it makes him cringe. Now, the song Play With Me was the last track on the album. This is one of the singles that was released out of the 4 singles off of that album. This song was actually played on the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It was the song that was played during the mall chase scene in the movie. Very cool scene, very cool movie, and then a very cool song. Hey, real quick before we move on, can you please do me a huge favor? Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Those are 2 things you can do for me right now. They're absolutely free. They will help me and this channel grow, which is the reason I'm here. I love doing this. I strive to grow. I want to continue doing it. And that is just the bottom line, because I said so. Anyway, please do those 2 things for me and let's continue the video. Now, obviously their first album wasn't a huge success, but it was definitely not a failure by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it brought in enough sufficient funds to help produce their next album, which they were able to do. They were able to bring in producer Michael Wagner, who had worked with bands like Dokken and worked with bands like White Lion. Now, this album would be called Extreme 2, Porno Graffiti, and it was released in 1990. Now, I can say one thing. They may not have hit a home run on their first try, their first album, but they definitely hit a home run on their second try. Now, the first 2 singles off of Extreme 2, Porno Graffiti, that were released on radio airwaves were Decadence Dance and the song Get the Funk Out, which were not a huge success, at least initially, and neither was the album. Now, Get the Funk Out has got to be one of the most badass songs by Extreme ever, and I'll stand by that, obviously an opinion, but it definitely puts Nuno Bettencourt's guitar style under a microscope and shows you just how good and skillful he was. And this was early on. Nuno has taken his skill to another level as it stands today, but we'll get into more of that later. So the album wasn't exactly reaching the heights they were hoping for in the United States. It was starting to catch some traction across overseas, the UK, Australia, other countries, but A&M Records, their company at the time, really pushed their third single and sent it to all sorts of radio stations across the US. And when this song was released, it was their acoustic ballad called More Than Words. Now, this definitely put the album on another level and is one of their most popular songs of all time. No doubt, if you're even not a rock and roll fan, you know the song More Than Words. And this song helped, well, it helped take the band to a level that they probably hoped they could reach, whether it would be sooner or later. It was going to be now for them. The song More Than Words hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Huge song, got them huge recognition. Now, their next song, their next single off the album, I should say, was another acoustic track called Wholehearted. Now, this song was another amazing song, and it actually hit #4 on the Billboard Hot 100. So the guys were getting huge recognition and were getting ready to go in the studio in '92 to work on their third studio album. Now, their recording sessions weren't interrupted by something that was very huge. They ended up playing the Freddie Mercury tribute concert, which tons of artists, tons of bands showed up to pay homage to the great Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of Queen that had passed away after a long-standing battle with HIV. And sad moment, but a great show, and they honored Freddie well. Everybody did, especially Extreme. And Brian May, guitarist for Queen, went on to say after that Extreme, probably more than any other band in the world, really understood what Queen was all about and what Freddie Mercury was all about. So the band Extreme released their third studio album, Three Sides to Every Story, in '92, September of '92 to be exact. And later on that next summer, they ended up playing Donington's Monster of Rock. Now, Donington's Monster of Rock is an awesome rock and roll festival and has featured many classic performances. AC/DC, just to mention one of the greatest performances ever done there. Van Halen had one of the greatest performances ever there. I mean, many bands have performed that festival and done great, have had classic performances there. And Extreme was just another band that got to perform and show themselves in front of millions of people, and they did great there. Now, Paul Gary, the drummer, ended up leaving the band, and they brought in a guy named Mike Mangini. Now, Mike Mangini would end up laying down tracks on their fourth studio album, Waiting for the Punchline. Now, as they rolled into '95, when that album was released, they were still a very well-known band doing great things, even with the lineup change. But as they rolled into '96, Nuno Bettencourt left the band to go pursue a solo career, and Nuno Bettencourt had no trouble getting any deals to do anything at that time, because he was well on the rise as being one of the hottest guitarists at that time, and he was still on the rise, and he would continue to be on the rise. But that opened up a door for Gary Cherone to do something very huge. Now, Ray Daniels was the former manager of the band Extreme, and thanks to his recommendation and already a built friendship between the Van Halen brothers, Alex and Eddie, Gary Cherone was stepping into the open position of lead singer for the band Van Halen thanks to the departure of Sammy Hagar. Now, Sammy Hagar had just ended a huge, very successful stint with the band. Huge! Because he did 4 albums with the band, all #1 albums, and that was Van Halen's only #1 albums. Before that, they had David Lee Roth, who was a huge success in his own right. It's crazy that they never had a #1 album with David Lee Roth, but they didn't. Got very close, but they never reached it. Now, after any stretch of the imagination could be imagined, there was no way this guy was going to step in and fill those shoes, right? Well, Van Halen 3 was released with Gary Cherone at the helm. Now, this album reached #4 on the charts. It sold over 500,000 copies, but to the standard of Van Halen, now this is Van Halen, that album was considered a failure, because you look at some of their past albums, they sold at least over 2 million copies in the US alone. Some of them albums sold over 10 million copies in the US. So it definitely didn't live up to their past success. Now, Gary Cherone would end up doing another album with Van Halen, but that would be his last, because he would end up departing after that, because it just, as much of a friendship was developed between the rest of the band and Cherone, it was clear that it wasn't a fit and it wasn't going to work. So he eventually departed, and Nuno Bettencourt and him worked on quite a few different solo projects in between those years. Now, it wouldn't be up until the early 2000s before there would be any talks of Extreme getting back together. So in 2004, that's when Extreme got back together and started doing some shows. And this kind of continued as not really a reformation, but more of a just kind of temporary, let's get back together and jam out, do some shows type of thing. It wasn't until 2008 that South as They Rock, their next studio album, will be released. And again, it wasn't a huge success, at least compared to some of their past albums, especially their second album, Extreme 2. I mean, the guys have so much talent that it amazes me that this album didn't do better than what it did. Now, this is 2008, mind you. Extreme has pretty much kind of just did their thing and tiptoed around actually, well, seemingly what the fans would think is taking it seriously and trying to, use the talents they had to actually do something great. Now, from 2008 all the way until this year, 2023, the band didn't release another album, but they finally did in 2023, this year, and they released the album 6, Game Changer. So on March 1st of 2023, Extreme released their album 6. Now, this followed up with a music video for their single Rise. So they were all released together and to huge reception, because I gotta be honest, so Justin Hawkins, the lead singer from The Darkness, he did a huge reaction video to this, because mainly to polarize and completely magnify Nuno Betancourt's guitar playing and his solo in that song. I mean, it's an amazing solo, and I didn't know they released the album, and I heard this reaction from him, and then another man that is amazing in the rock scene, awesome guitarist in his own right, Rick Beato. This guy on his channel also talked about Nuno Betancourt's solo, and everybody else in the guitar world was, and the rock and roll world was. This song is amazing. It completely fits the times. It's like these guys showed their evolution. You know, we can evolve. We don't have to sound like our early 80s stuff and our 90s stuff. We can fit in today, and this album in its entirety fits into the sound of rock and roll these days. But Nuno Betancourt's guitar playing is just completely finally got put out there for what it is, and he's an amazing guitarist. I put him up there. I'll be honest with you, right now he is my favorite guitarist alive today. After Eddie's death, I think Nuno Betancourt's right up there. And there's been some amazing guitarists. There still are some amazing guitarists. But thanks to Rise and thanks to the album 6, people are finally taking notice of what Nuno Betancourt can do on the guitar. And it's nothing short of amazing. And if you backtrack to all of their stuff before, you're like, well, shit, why the hell wasn't Nuno put up there with some of the greats before? But if he wasn't, he definitely is now. I can truly say that thanks to the release of 6 by the band Extreme, it really put them out there to a new audience, people that probably didn't know who they were or maybe have only known them for their song More Than Words. But it definitely opened up a whole new world for them and their exposure. And for the guys as well, they're in their 50s and 60s. I mean, the guys, they've been around a while. And I gotta be honest, I gotta tell you one thing. You know, when it comes to YouTube, they're very fickle when it comes to copyrighting things. And myself, I've been doing this channel for less than a year. Very proud of where I've gotten to. Definitely want to get a lot further, and that comes with building a community and an audience. You know, I think of a channel, there's a channel called Rock and Roll True Stories. Much respect to that channel. It's one that I admire and definitely has used as inspiration, sorry. But that channel's amazing. And then another one I can tell you about is the Punk Rock NBA with Finn McKenty. That guy's amazing. Another channel that I want to emulate and definitely has been an inspiration to me. And then another one is Professor of Rock. Now, when it comes to Punk Rock NBA and Professor of Rock, those two guys clearly have an in with the music industry. They've done interviews with some legends, great bands, and that comes with growing a community, which I'm trying to do with you out there viewing this video. They've also played a lot of music that would be considered copyright. Now, I apologize because it comes down to storytelling, and I love to tell these stories, but if I could play every song that I'm telling you without, ramifications to my channel or helping it grow, I would do that. And then eventually in the future, I can do that with growing this channel in the community. I want to be able to interview rock legends or up and coming, young bands and young artists in the rock world. But that comes with time, and it really comes with you helping me. Like I said before at the beginning of the video, you got to subscribe to the channel. But more than that, you got to watch the videos. You got to share the videos and put it out there so it can grow. But, definitely that's a goal. I want to be able to play the songs that I'm telling you about, and YouTube be able to not do anything about it because I have the rights to play it. I have permission from the right people to play it or show it. So really comes down to that, and with the band Extreme, some of the stuff that I can't show you without being, a violation for it really sucks. But definitely I'll tell you this, I need your help to help the channel grow, and that's all there is to it. So when it comes to Extreme, the guys that came a long way. And I love telling that story. They're an underrated band. I heard them as a young kid, and not until I got into my older age, like now, that I more recently had a new respect for them. And I jam them out every day because there's so much talent there. It's just unfortunate they had to fall behind some other bands that were just bigger at the times that they were around. But no matter what, you can't deny the guy's talent. And Nuno Betancourt, one of the greatest guitarists ever. There's just hands down. And Gary Cherone, even in his 60s, the guy's stage presence is amazing. It's you wouldn't even think that. The guy jumps around like David Lee Roth did in the early days, this late 70s, early 80s with Van Halen. But no matter what, you got to respect the band, and please help the channel grow. I really love doing this, and I want to be able to sit down one day and say, hey, I'm interviewing Sammy Hagar, or I'm interviewing the guys from Bad Religion, or the guys from Rat, or the guys from Simple Plan, Blink-182, you know, my rock love goes so vast, and I know that many of you out there are the same, you know. It's not just one genre. If you're a rock fan, you have a vast variety. But anyway, I really appreciate you guys watching. Until next time, go take care of yourself and your family. I'm out.